Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 21st of January in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, President Trump begins his second term in office with a pledge to enact 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada.
The newly inaugurated US leader signs a raft of executive orders on everything from immigration and energy to overturning January 6th convictions.
Plus, getting ready for takeoff. Bloomberg learns the UK government's preparing to approve expansions to Heathrow, Gatwick and Luton airports.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
US President Donald Trump has begun his term in office with a blizzard of policy announcements, reviews and executive orders. In his inaugural address, the 45th and now 47th president vowed to prioritise America's interests and create a golden age for the country.
From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer.
Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office later, President Trump said he plans to impose tariffs on America's two closest neighbours by the start of February.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
The dollar jumped against most major currencies following Trump's remarks. If imposed, the tariffs would affect $1.8 trillion worth of goods and services trade and would likely lead to retaliatory measures from Canada and Mexico.
But the new president held off on announcing tariffs on China. Instead, Donald Trump ordered his administration to address unfair trade practices globally and investigate whether Beijing had complied with the deal signed during his first term. Political science professor Adam Ramey says Trump may have longer-term strategic aims.
One of the things that will remain to be seen is whether or not the talk of tariffs is a bargaining chip or if it's an actual policy. On the one hand, in his inauguration speech, Trump talked a lot about President William McKinley in the late 19th century and how tariffs helped to build American industry and were great. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of folks have suggested that his talk of imposing high tariffs on major American trade partners is a bargaining chip.
Adam Ramey, who teaches at NYU Abu Dhabi, speaking there. According to an unreleased fact sheet seen by Bloomberg, the moves taken by Trump's administration are aimed at, quote, reversing the destructive impact of globalist America Last trade policy. During an impromptu press conference in the Oval Office yesterday evening, Trump avoided committing to a plan for Chinese tariffs. President Trump said he's been invited to China and that there would be further meetings and calls with President Xi, potentially buying time for China to influence the US.
Well, Trump also temporarily halted a ban on the Chinese-owned app TikTok in the US. An executive order signed by the president grants the platform a 75-day reprieve from a countrywide prohibition that took effect on Sunday. He even suggested the US could be open to a partnership with the company.
The US should be entitled to get half of TikTok, but it's worthless if the president doesn't sign, then it's worthless. So I think, like a joint venture, I think we would have a joint venture with the people from TikTok. We'll see what happens.
Donald Trump also said that the US arm of the platform, estimated to be worth around $50 billion, could hit $1 trillion in market value under American ownership.
Donald Trump has pardoned almost all of those convicted for participating in the January 6th, 2021 attack on the US Capitol. Charges in any pending cases relating to the incident were also ordered to be dropped by the newly sworn-in president. The president spoke to reporters while signing the orders.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon. Yes. Full pardon. We hope they get them. We hope they come out tonight, frankly.
President Donald Trump speaking. The pardons cover cases ranging from misdemeanor trespassing to assaulting police with weapons and affect over 1,500 people. Trump also commuted the prison sentences of 14 people associated with extremist groups.
The new president has made sweeping changes to how government works and to US policies on his first day in office in moves that will reshape the global energy landscape. Donald Trump ordered the US to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. He pushed to end electric vehicle subsidies, potentially boosting average new car prices by $3,000, and the removal of bans on offshore oil and gas drilling and a freeze to wind power permits.
Trump also signed off on major actions that he had promised on the campaign trail. He declared a national emergency at the border with Mexico and is seeking to prevent babies born by two illegal migrants from being granted citizenship. The president also directed that the US would withdraw from the World Health Organization. He rescinded all transparency and safety requirements for artificial intelligence developers. He axed diversity programs at federal agencies. It is expected that many of the orders that Trump signed on Monday will be challenged in court.
In other news, the UK government is preparing to back building a third runway at Heathrow Airport in a bid for economic growth. Bloomberg has learned that Labour will back the controversial expansions to airports. James Wilcock has the details.
A third runway at Heathrow was first proposed in 2003. What followed was a 20-year wrangling as UK politicians wavered between economic growth, environmental credentials and popularity. Now, sources tell Bloomberg the government is giving the plans a green light. They want to signal their pro-growth credentials by approving a number of infrastructure projects. But if they do go ahead, Labour may find themselves accused of sacrificing the environment for growth, a charge they themselves made against the previous Conservative government. In London, James Wilcock, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. On the markets, after initial relief over tariff action saw the dollar weakening by the most in 14 months, as the White House executive order headlines started to roll in, we were on a huge roller coaster ride in terms of the FX space. The dollar has strengthened this morning, the Canadian dollar falling 0.8%, the Mexican peso dropping 1.1% against the dollar. Cash treasuries also reopening today after a holiday. They show some relief on the lack of big tariff news, or at least real timeline. 10-year yields lower by 8 basis points this morning. And those are our top stories for you this morning. On the markets, after initial relief over tariff action saw the dollar weakening by the most in 14 months, as the White House executive order headlines started to roll in, we were on a huge roller coaster ride in terms of the FX space. The dollar has strengthened this morning, the Canadian dollar falling 0.8%, the Mexican peso dropping 1.1% against the dollar. Cash treasuries also reopening today after a holiday. They show some relief on the lack of big tariff news, or at least real timeline. 10-year yields lower by 8 basis points this morning.
Well, in a moment, we will have more on what Donald Trump announced on his first day in office and how that might affect the rest of the world. But it was quite a day in Washington. Yeah,
we got two major speeches from President Donald Trump. The inaugural address, then a sort of more relaxed second speech. It has been, you have to say, the most extraordinary political comeback. Yesterday perhaps was the pinnacle of that. We often think that we're great at pomp and circumstance here in the UK, while it was absolutely incredible in the US. Trump has promised this golden age for America. I was struck by President Trump's assertion that his victory was divinely ordained. This is what he said. I felt then the assassination attempts against his life, and believe even more so now that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again. I think actually abroad, the issue is going to be much more about the more aggressive foreign policy stance that this Trump administration could take. That he talked a lot about the Panama Canal and a number of other countries.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if you just read one piece from the full coverage, of course, across Bloomberg's platforms this morning, Bloomberg Opinions, John Authors saying, "Get used to the roller coaster. He's back," which includes several A's in the headline. Just one view, of course, on the market reaction, the raft of policy measures, so much to dig into, and plenty of reporting, of course, from across Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has acted swiftly, signing executive orders to begin implementing his campaign pledges on deporting migrants, increasing energy production, exiting the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization, freezing new regulations and ending DEI policies for the military and federal workforces. Joining us now to discuss, Bloomberg's senior editor, Bill Ferries. Bill, let's start with some of the trade action. Is this the start of a trade war with Mexico and Canada?
Well, it's certainly a shot across the bow because, we didn't hear a lot about China. It looks like they're still kind of reviewing their approach towards China. But Trump did come out and say he plans to enact tariffs of as much as 25% on Mexico and Canada by February 1st. Now, February 1st, that gives him, by my check, about 10 days or so. There's definitely time in the Trump world to negotiate some sort of a pause on that, for him to have talks with the leaders of Canada and Mexico to stave that off and be able to claim success, saying that we've entered negotiations, so I'll give Mexico and Canada another month. But it is a shot across the bow. I think after the campaign in which he talked about tariffs so much, I think there was a political need for him to do something today on day one because, as you've said, he's got this slew of emergency orders, executive orders that he wants tariffs to be a part of that. But we'll see. I think in the Trump universe, 10 or 11 days is still time to negotiate.
Yes. Meanwhile, a lot of his pronouncements were focused domestically, a crackdown on immigration and the border. Major changes coming to the workforce and to citizens?
Yeah, I think that, if there was one overarching theme or one issue he hit the hardest on, I think it really was this declaring this emergency at the southern border. They immediately canceled this app that immigrants coming to the United States would use to get appointments with Customs and Border officials, this CBP app. There were people at the southern border waiting to go into their meetings based off the app, and the app just shut down, and they've put a pause on that. So I think you are likely to see some sort of increased troop presence at the U.S. southern border in the coming days. It might be reserve forces. It may not be active military, but I think there's going to be more of an armed presence at the border. That was really the core of Trump's campaign in 2016 and again in 2024. So I think employers are going to be looking very carefully about whether people who they expected to be coming in and working on some of these short-term visas are going to be there or not. And then, of course, all the people overseas who have been waiting at embassies to come in either as immigrants or even as visitors, I think they're going to be wondering whether that's still going to go through.
Bill, another set of policy announcements which have global impact. Energy, opening up drilling and pushing US oil and gas exports, rowing back on EVs and wind farms. I mean, how significant are these measures?
It's hard to know. I mean, the U.S. was already basically producing a record amount of oil during the Biden administration. So how much were restrictions really holding production back? It's not really clear to me. I mean, some of that is going to just be supply and demand in the market. But I think the signal here, the bigger picture signal is trying to cut red tape and regulations. So regulations that may have prevented oil companies from drilling in certain parts of the Gulf of Mexico, which he's trying to rename the Gulf of America, or off the eastern coast of the U.S. I think the message going out is, hey, the federal regulations are getting rolled back there. So if that's what's been holding you back, start telling us where you want to explore and where you might be able to produce. If environmental regulations in the American West have been stopping your fracking efforts, those are likely going to be coming down. So I don't know that we're going to suddenly see America producing an extra million barrels of oil a day, but I think the opportunity is going to be there for companies that want to do more exploration to do it.
It is amazing that everyone is trying to assess the size and sweep of the measures that Donald Trump, has signed in or agreed to day one. Trump talked about tariffs are going to make us rich as hell, in his words. A lot of people economists might disagree with that. How overwhelmed / uncertain are people about these policies? How do you assess the size and scope?
Well, there's some symbolism in all this, right? I mean, every incoming administration, for instance, puts a freeze on all the new regulations that hadn't been implemented yet. That's just like a standard operating procedure. Some of this is, or much of this might get challenged by the courts, will get tied up in litigation. Some of it is more symbolism than anything. You got to remember the president, I think he got his first cabinet secretary, Marco Rubio, was approved today. Most of his team is not approved. Most of his team doesn't even have necessarily hearings scheduled. I do think we're going to get the Treasury Secretary perhaps confirmed by the end of the week. But he doesn't have his top cabinet leaders in office. Some of that will take weeks. And so some of these policies are really going to, in terms of the fleshing out, that's going to take a little bit of while. And you will see legal pushback. You already have seen some legal pushback on these executive orders, but I think there's going to be a lot more of that in the days to come.
Okay, Bill Ferries, our senior editor, thank you very much.
Well, let's dig into the plans announced by Donald Trump. They're being watched closely around the world. One notable omission from his actions on trade, he avoided committing to a tariff plan on China. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Jenny Marsh, who leads our coverage of the economy and government in China. Good morning, Jenny. Why do you think that there was no announcement immediately targeting China?
It's a very good question, and I guess one can only speculate. But it did seem like Trump was really sort of exerting some caution when it came to handling the China relationship, particularly when you contrasted it with the announcement on Mexico and Canada, and he sort of followed through on the tariff threats there that he'd made during the campaign trail. And, I think that just goes to show what an important relationship it is with China. It is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. And I think, Trump has fully established his bargaining power on the campaign trail. And now, he signaled very clearly that he wants to have meetings, calls with President Xi, and he even talked about being invited to Beijing for a trip, although he didn't say whether or not he planned to accept that invitation. But what he basically did was, he offered a bit of an olive branch and holding off from any immediate action, but also set the stage for sort of a long round of trade talks, which is something, of course, politicians on both sides of the relationship are very familiar with from the first trade war.
So Donald Trump ordered a study into unfair trade practices and how China has complied with existing deals. What do we know about what that will involve?
They're basically going to look back now to the Phase 1 trade deal, which was something that was sort of struck during his first presidency, and when China pledged to buy, so many goods from the US, and only actually followed through on 63% of the goods that it promised to buy. The deal was struck right on the eve of the pandemic. So Beijing said, that the shocks from COVID sort of upended the conditions for it buying those goods. But of course, for Trump, he feels he's going to feel kind of wronged that Beijing never went through on its part of that deal. So that's just sort of one part of it. They're also going to look at the relationship more broadly. There are bills going through Congress right now that are proposing to revoke China's permanent normal trade relations with the US. This is something quite technical, but economists say that actually if they did revoke that status, that could be as impactful as a 60% blanket tariff on China. This is something to watch very closely there as well.
Okay. So then, in terms of specifics, Trump also did seem to come out in favour of TikTok, again, sort of more firmly.
Yeah, so there was sort of another kind of win for Xi, if you like. But I don't know if that was because Trump was trying to sort of be more moderate with Beijing. He was talking a lot when he was at the Oval Office, sort of fielding questions from reporters about how connecting with young people on TikTok had helped him win the election, and how Republicans can't normally sort of engage with that audience, but he had managed to because of this platform. And that's really what's changed his mind on TikTok, because obviously it was Trump in his first presidency that suggested that TikTok should be banned in the US. Now he's done a 180, and he was talking about how he thinks it's a great deal for China if they can go in this joint venture. And he said that if China was to reject that deal, he would consider it an act of hostility. And then he talked about tariffs as high as 100% on Beijing if they did reject this proposal to split the ownership of TikTok.
What's been the reaction in China so far to the measures announced by Donald Trump?
Pretty quiet. I think going into this election, the Chinese have been very cautious. During the first Trump era, there was the wolf warrior approach. They realized now that was not helpful, and they've trod very carefully, trying not to escalate things. State media today has been pretty quiet. They've got some sort of straight stories, and any commentary has focused on Trump's sort of more isolationist action, so trying to take the US out of the Paris Accord and the World Health Organization, but not really focusing on the fact they haven't been hit with tariffs. Of course, the foreign ministry in Beijing will brief at 3 p.m. today, as it always does. So we might get some sort of official reaction to some of Trump's moves today there. But also, obviously, Davos is happening at the moment as well. And I think it's kind of interesting that, China has chosen to send Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang to that, whereas in other years, she herself has attended. Last year, it was Li Chang. They've chosen to put someone a little bit less high profile, and they haven't put up one of their sort of top leaders on a stage in front of executives one day after Trump took office. And I think that kind of signals they do want to sort of tamp down tensions and sort of tread softly, basically, on this while they can.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.